It has become such a fad that sometimes people are saying that it's nature-based solutions, and at times we don't know exactly how they are reacting and implementing. So the discussions and overall today it would be the objective would be to discuss what are the experiences in nature-based solutions, where are the limitations, what are the policy linkages, how those are taking us forward, and we can inform and influence policies and implementation processes. Societal challenges, overall, the way the world has responded to them have led towards the current crisis of biodiversity and climate. So a lot to do what, the world we tried, okay, we will eradicate poverty, we will have, healthy ecosystems and all this, but still things are not working. Something is going wrong somewhere. And that's why nature-based solutions, this term officially was defined with members, partners, EU had started using, and then in 2016, Hawaii Congress, it was also officially defined by IUCN, and then, it got picked up so fast. And now we have hundreds of initiatives which are being labeled as nature-based solutions, but are they really nature-based? Are they responding? Because nature-based solutions, that is not just old wine in new bottle, because that question comes and many a time we don't ask, because it seems perhaps we are traitor or something, but let's discuss it, because many of the policymakers, many of the practitioners, they are talking about it, whether nature-based solutions, they are just the same thing, you have come up with a new phrase. So let's just do a little bit of Mentimeter, and you have perhaps some started doing it, but have you heard the term? I believe all we already been discussing over here. Do you know this? And how many of you would get up and operationally define it? It's now. Anybody would like to define or? Okay, 3 are saying they can stand up and define it. Okay, that's great. But still, this reflects, though we have been, discussing nature-based solutions, but maybe we don't know how, because every word over there has some meaning. It links with something else. So you have maybe a few more seconds if you haven't voted yet. And all those who have never heard nature-based solutions, we will just share the definition now. So when it was defined, working with many experts from all over the world, because, IUCN, we are a unique organization that in the states and NGO members, they are all part of it. So it went through a lot of consultation processes, and it means, it responds to the societal challenges. And at the same time, it tries to keep a balance between biodiversity and ecosystem services and economic development. So it's like, sustainable development, but again, responding to specific societal problems, because that's why it's called solution, that climate, adaptation, livelihoods, biodiversity, other things, so those all are encompassing, and this is an umbrella term we are using. Just to be on the same page, that's the definition we will be working today, and then all the word they are doing it, but sometimes not following what does it exactly mean, because these could be also modified ecosystems. And there was a lot of critique on that. What do you exactly mean? The dams and all this. So still we are thinking it through and developing some standards, because what happened in attempt to have social development, economic development, and biodiversity, when we evaluated many initiatives, we are at, sort of polarized. Either some are just doing biodiversity conservation, or some are trying to do, using ecosystem and do economic development. How to keep the balance? That's critical. And the issue is, in conservation sector, other than biodiversity, whenever they try to attempt to have economic development and social development through ecosystems, there are no standards. You might have noticed that we have been doing climate adaptation for last 30, 40 years, and the last 20 years picked up really well, and a lot of investment has gone into that, billions of dollars. There are no standards in adaptation. So when we say it's successful adaptation, what exactly that mean? Implementation of project activities, all the budget being spent properly, or more than that. And that's the challenge, that we need to have impact. And nature-based solutions, now we are all moving together towards that end. Can there be standards? How to have those standards? How to make implementation process effective? How to link policy and implementation? So that's the key challenge also, how organizations are attempting to have policy, operationalization of policies on ground. So we have experts who will be sharing with you the experiences that how policy interventions are being operationalized, what are the challenges in that. So I would request our panelists, starting the first session, and Mikko, please, could you join us? Nathalie, Jane, and Alexander. And we will be having, anywhere, please. Mikko is head of the Adaptation Fund, and Nathalie is founder and director of Nature-Based Solutions Initiative. Jane, CEO of Wetland International. Alexander is director of FAO Climate Change. So our panel will discuss the policy-related aspects of nature-based solutions. So I'll start with Alexander. How, FAO climate change work is, trying to link policy and action on ground, and what are the experiences? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously very hard to do in 3 minutes, so I'll try to be very punchy about that. We've been working on policy, obviously, forever. FAO's been around for 74 years. I'd say the most urgent thing we have now is to translate those policies into concrete action, because as we all know, a lot of arms were twisted going into the Paris Agreement. A lot of countries were encouraged to make very ambitious reaches on their national determined contributions on the mitigation side, but the sweetener often to that was there will be help for adaptation. This was the message given very broadly. And I hate to say it, but to a large degree, that really hasn't happened yet, or it hasn't happened on the scale of what was expected. So when I talk to our member countries, FAO has 194 member states, they are begging for adaptation support. And there's a lot of very good policy work out there. Obviously, we're developing some more, but really what we're trying to work on is to bring that policy into concrete action on the ground. So just to give a couple of examples, you probably know that livestock, specifically ruminants, are responsible for about 11% of all greenhouse gas emissions, mainly in the form of methane. And there needs to be a solution to that problem. Some of it can be dietary change, but a lot of it has to be very specific. So we're supporting something called the Low Carbon Livestock Coalition, which is focusing right now on reducing livestock emissions by about 30%. This is an adaptive process within countries. Another partnership we're looking at, it's called Rec Soil, the initiative. We've known for a long time that there's huge potential for storing carbon in soils, but we've never really come up with common standards. We don't have a certification process. So soil carbon sequestration now is where REDD+ was maybe 15 years ago. It's really at the beginning, but we have to work on that. We need to translate this idea, this policy, into concrete action, so we're supporting countries and consortia on that. Other areas that we're working on very specifically with many partners, of course, with UNDP and UNEP on the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. We know that huge amounts of land have been degraded. by overuse, by many factors, and by climate change, we need to restore those ecosystems. Just to mention one last one, as a growing percentage of human population is condensed in cities, the whole issue of greening cities is becoming a big issue. FAO and many partners together are working on something called the Great Green Wall of Cities. Cities without sufficient greenery become heat sinks, they become heat islands, and so we need to address that. So rather than developing new policy initiatives, we're trying to work now to bring policy initiatives to concrete action within countries, of course being FAO with our major focus on the Global South and on developing countries.
Thank you, Alexander. Really good timing. So that will allow us to have good discussions later on. So please keep your questions, and we will come back after all the panelists have done. Jane, Wetland International is working globally, and very specific niche it has with wetlands and all, the coastal wetlands. A lot of work has been done. So how you are trying to link global policies with the work you are doing on ground?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've just come across from the Nature-Based Solutions Momentum session in the UN, and just a quick reflection. When you hear ministers of defense, the OECD, UNDP, representatives of governments, big corporates, all enthusing about nature-based solutions, it does give you a little bit of optimism, so that's great. But I think, as you were hinting, there's a massive gap between saying that nature-based solutions are essential to achieve sustainable development and to tackle the climate crisis. There's a gap between that and actually implementing it on the ground. And we're working all over the world on the ground, and we see that this is really not reached. So I think what's, of course, with the climate crisis, water comes to the fore. It's our most precious natural resource, and yet actually governments, private sector are giving it far too little attention in terms of how to manage it wisely and fairly. And wetlands, of course, are the ecosystem that stores, regulates, and provides water for all the different uses, and they're literally still going down the drain and up in smoke. So doing no harm in terms of nature-based solutions is far from sufficient. And there's the challenge for those in our sector, because what's the future? We can't go back to how these wetland systems were in the past. We actually have to rethink how wetlands can play their role in the new landscapes, with the growing populations, with the new demands. What's the future niche, and how to design that, and how to connect all the different sectors that really need to play their role. One thing that we're very firm about is that this all has to start with engaging those who live in and around the remaining wetlands, because they actually know a lot, and they care a lot, of course, about what happens to those natural resources. So finding new governance mechanisms is crucial, ones that are inclusive, and especially women, of course, are often the managers of water, and yet they're very rarely included in those local governance mechanisms. And what we see is that there's the sort of new governance that comes with single sector approaches like agriculture or forestry, and then there's the traditional governance of communities, and both are failing in terms of actually protecting and restoring these wetland resources. So we need to bridge that gap between sectoral development and traditional law. So we need actually institutions who are innovative in that field. And I think what we also really need for the new landscapes are really good decision-making tools, which can, develop the realistic scenarios, some options, so that when we have an inclusive, participative approach, there is something on the table to talk about that's real, with real numbers, real implications, for example, of alternative water allocation decisions. And this works some magic, because suddenly the different parties who may be competing over water and wetland resources stop blaming each other, and they have to work together, and they have to actually join up to agree on a solution. And that's the start. And we would say that's really the key to designing integrated landscape scale programs which can be financed, ones which really can be transformational for society and nature, and they can be backed up by policies and regulations. And once you've got that, I think there's, really finance is not the bottleneck here. What we need are these really big, bold, transformative landscape scale projects which really are inclusive. So I think, that's where we're focusing our attention. And for all of that to happen, we need, lots more partnerships across the different disciplines and expertise. So, we're increasingly working with the private sector, with humanitarian organizations, with architects, with those that know about governance, all these, with engineers, because in this way, we know that our expertise will find somewhere to land. So I think, convening these kind of partnerships is key. And, just to come back where I started, none of this is going to happen unless the eyes are open at the political level. So Ibrahim Chow spoke earlier about a wave of political momentum for nature-based solutions, and I think that's the starting point for any of this to hit the ground.
Thank you, Jane. Political uptake, policy uptake of nature-based solutions, that's critical, and that's taking place. Nathalie, you did the analysis on, nature-based solutions and NDCs and all this. Would you share with us what's the outcomes and where is it going and what are the challenges?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. It's wonderful to be here. I just want to echo your comments. It was incredibly moving, I think it might be the right word, this morning. In fact, all day hearing world leader after world leader from business, from government, basically endorsing nature-based solutions. It's an incredible momentum for nature now within the context of climate change. But as this momentum for nature builds, and as all those high-level promises, get translated into actions on the ground, and in particular, sort of looking in the near future, as the NDCs get revised, we need to make sure that we get the messages about nature-based solutions right. This is incredibly important. Nature-based solutions are not an alternative to decarbonising the economy, number one. Really important, because some sectors are arguably viewing it that way, and we need to make sure that stops. Nature-based solutions must involve supporting species-rich ecosystems in general, not just forests. We need to be thinking about peatlands, we need to be thinking about grasslands and wetlands, as well as naturally occurring forests that are rich in carbon and support livelihoods. And nature-based solutions really must be recognised more broadly as an adaptation tool by the mitigation community. These worlds are still operating slightly separate from one another. There is now a wealth of evidence, both from the peer-reviewed literature, scientific literature, as well as practitioner learning, that if we restore, protect, and enhance ecosystems, they will lower human vulnerability to climate change. They will reduce our exposure and our sensitivity, and they will enhance our adaptive capacity. Those three aspects of vulnerability. And there is also, almost by week, growing evidence for the cost-effectiveness of nature-based solutions. They often provide the only affordable solution to climate change impacts in much of the world, especially in the developing world. But as we've discovered from our analysis, this is work done with IUCN and International Institute for the Environment and Development as well, as we've discovered when we've taken a deep dive on those high-level pledges, particularly looking at Paris Agreement pledges, the NDCs, we find that those targets for nature-based solutions just are not drawing on that rich understanding, either from practitioner or from scientific literature. They emphasize afforestation and tree planting. The emphasis is on the area of land to be afforested, not the quality of land. And local people, local knowledge and local stewardship isn't there. And this is a very dangerous situation, and it really needs addressing. You know, we need to make sure we get all that information about how ecosystems work and how resilient they are in a warming world, because everything is changing. And what science that has been conducted rigorously, especially over the last 40 years since the signing of the Rio Conventions, has demonstrated that the more diverse an ecosystem, the more resilient it is to change, to pathogens, to climate extremes and so forth, and therefore the more resilient the communities and the more adaptive the communities that depend upon it. So we need to consolidate, we need to translate all that information, and so we're actively involved with this, again, work with IIED in developing evidence tools and platforms to get that, get that information into the hands of those that are designing and implementing policy. It's not enough just to sort of consolidate and translate. We also need to build capacity on the ground for understanding what good nature-based solutions look like, what the standard for nature-based solutions look like. And then, so we are also now establishing nature-based solution task forces in climate vulnerable countries that are rich in biodiversity, that have high dependency on natural resources. These task forces will bring together members of different ministries within governments, with businesses, with local communities, and with the social and natural and physical scientists to try and basically inform that process by which these high-level pledges get translated into actions, to make sure that solutions, nature-based solutions, are really, really relevant for that particular community, that particular ecosystem, that particular watershed. Because with nature-based solutions, there's no one-size-fits-all. You know, every community, every watershed, every ecosystem is rather different, and so we need to look at the federation of those solutions rather than trying to find some sort of top-down solution that fits everything. You know, these task forces, one of the main missions will be to steer governments and businesses away from single species plantations for timber and biofuel and towards these species-rich ecosystems that store more carbon, they reduce poverty, they provide livelihoods, and I would argue they restore hope. You know, we can't separate our societies, our economies, and our ecosystems, or we do so, or have done so, at our peril. And we cannot increase our resilience in the face of climate change without looking after our ecosystems. And I hope that next time, the resilient events, such as that being hosted today, and the nature climate events are integrated rather than separated as they are today. You know, we all have to work hard to integrate nature and climate mitigation and adaptation, and to scale up these holistic solutions. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nat. So a lot of work is going on, and its uptake is there. And if nature-based solutions are working so well, are there enough resources? As said, adaptation is locale specific with different needs and all that. So Mikko, where are we in Adaptation Fund? How it's working in this sector, and what does it mean nature-based solutions for you? I think it's on. Yeah.
Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be here on this esteemed panel. The Adaptation Fund has been doing adaptation for about 12 years now, and it's one of the only funds that's focusing on the funding concrete adaptation projects that target the most vulnerable communities in developing countries. The fund has been growing from small beginnings quite rapidly. We have a project portfolio of almost 100 projects with a value of $650 million and growing very rapidly. We are also a fund that pioneered something called direct access, which gives more ownership to the developing countries that we support in managing the funds that we provide. A key aspect of many of the Adaptation Fund's projects are links to ecosystems, and how that often goes hand in hand with enhancing livelihoods of the vulnerable populations, and how it improves their resilience. For example, we funded projects dealing with afforestation and restoring degraded forests, strengthening soils, protecting water supplies, and reducing erosion in critical watersheds, which can have the dual benefits of reducing the risk and magnitude of flash floods, and at the same time improving water availability during times of drought. Mangroves are a type of ecosystem that is present in quite a few of our projects, and obviously from the perspective usually of reducing coastal erosion and protecting against certain coastal phenomena like storm surges. The Adaptation Fund has not set specific goals on how much of our resources should be directed to ecosystem-based adaptation measures. We are established under the UN Climate Convention, so it's essentially a government-driven process, and the governments define their priorities. But we've been happy to see that in many cases, ecosystems are what the governments prioritize. But it's the government's choice which types of activities they want to have funded. In addition to working with ecosystems, of course, across our portfolio, we need to make sure that harm is not done to ecosystems, even in cases where the focus of the project is not on ecosystems. I could share examples from our portfolio, but I think many of you are equally familiar with those, so that's maybe not necessary. Instead, I would just like to talk a little bit about what is changing at the moment. We have, as I said, 12 years of experience, and that has given us and other adaptation funders and implementers quite a good understanding of what works in some cases. But what we need to do, like Jane mentioned, is to increase ambition, to do larger scale things, to be transformational, and to do that based on what Nathalie mentioned on what good adaptation, what good nature-based solutions look like, for instance, in the case of adaptation. So what we are doing as a fund to try and increase ambition. Well, we are a fund that cannot cover all the finance needs that developing countries have in terms of adaptation, but we can create scalable and replicable models that can be then used as a basis for future and scaled up efforts. And I fully take Nathalie's point that it's not a cookie cutter, everything needs to be tailored, but if and when there are models that turn out that are shown to work, it's better to build on those rather than trying to invest in reinventing the wheel. At the same time, we also need to invest in reinventing something or inventing something, and we've opened a new funding windows just last year on innovation in adaptation, and nature-based solutions are an area where we would really like to see innovative approaches. And innovation in this case, coming from this background of being a multilateral fund, means allowing us to take a bit more risk. It's not taking risk for the environment or for the ecosystems or for the people, but trying out new things that have not yet been shown to work. And that's what we would like to do during the next several years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikko. Your last point, that risk, that's so critical to take, because if you look at all climate change and all those who are working in the field, climate change is a moving target. You will build the capacities of the communities for flood management. 3-4 years, 5 years, they will be drought in the same area. So it's very difficult to how you invest and then think a return on investment will remain and sustainability. So some of these terms which are being asked and posed to the adaptation sector and nature-based solution, what is return on investment, what is all this? In the context of climate change, it's a big challenge. And sometimes we get carried away, because we have to prove it. And then, we go into all lengths to do it. It's very challenging. You all are also engaged in work, in the field, in nature-based solutions, or other areas. So we are now opening for question answer, your observations, and also all those, because it's live streaming, all those who want to put question, please use the Mentimeter, and your questions, we will go to that also. So please, it's open. Any reaction? Your, yes, Gordon? Yeah. Is there? Okay, you take this, please.
Good afternoon, and just to the panel, thank you. Some of the points made were quite interesting, and picking up on what Jane said, particularly about when you're looking at investing in ecosystems, working with the communities which are living within them. And I'm curious from your experience as panelists, that tension between sort of the policy dialogue and looking at the commitments and timelines and translating that right down to the community level and how we engage and continue to adapt our nature-based solutions to ensure that they are tailored for the needs and requirements, which might not always align with the larger policy dialogue. So just some reflections or thoughts on that would be appreciated.
We will take maybe 3 questions, then I'll come back to the panel. Any other observation, sharing of experiences, or questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Bridget Mugambe. I come from Uganda, and I work with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, which is a continental organization working in up to 50 countries in Africa. My question is to Mikko. In regards to the funds, it's a reality that a lot of climate finance doesn't really get to the people who need it. Those are the people that mainly affected by climate change, but are also down there coming up with innovative ways of dealing with these challenges. And you've talked about, I think, more than 100 projects, and I would like for you to share a bit of your experience, because most of these projects actually go to governments, and the finance is lost in a lot of workshops and others. And maybe also a comment from Alexander. You talked about the nature-based solutions with FAO and the example of the low carbon livestock emissions. And I would also love to get a comment from you. Some of the constituencies that AFSA work with are pastoralist communities. And it is common knowledge that these are some of the communities that are, always blamed for emissions and all this. And some of these projects have really, really targeted pastoralists, to a point of some of our governments declaring that, pastoralists should be done away with and replaced with some of these projects like Red Plus. So I'd like to get a comment from you on how FAO is actually balancing this with the livelihoods of these different communities, pastoralists, fisherfolk, farmers, indigenous groups, and all those. Thank you.
Thank you. One question, yeah. Up there. Let's try it, yeah.
It's okay.
Jane in particular. Thank you. I'm not sure, did you hear that? My name's Adrian Sim. I'm with the Alliance for Water Stewardship. And my remark is for Jane in particular, because what you were describing about water and its relationship to resilience and climate change was obviously speaking very much to our priorities. And I guess I'm coming at this from a very similar position to you, Jane, but we have a standard system that engages water users in the sustainable management of water resources. And I guess I'm frustrated by the pace at which we can make progress. And I'd like your thoughts on how organizations like ours can be more instrumental, pivotal in accelerating the pace of progress.
Thank you, David. Okay, let's have some responses. First question was policy and operation challenges of the field. Should we start? Yeah, anyone? Yeah.
Yes, so I think this is an excellent question because from our experience in Wetlands International trying to bring about change at a landscape scale, well, our conclusion is you have to work at all levels simultaneously, basically. So, but I would want to emphasize the value of the bottom-up policy influencing. So the thing is, in order to do something of a significant scale in a country, generally, well, always you have to work with the national and local government, and there may be some policy and regulation shifts necessary from the beginning to allow something that is innovative to happen, that cuts across sectors. So that's the first one. But then actually what we do is then set the program working in the field and then continually feed back what is policy relevant to the different scales in the government and thereby getting a change, and then embedding the actual changes in the landscape into the planning system. Even the really small changes. So, for example, a women's community group carries out a project and changes the land use in a very small parcel. We make sure it gets captured in the planning system so that that is safeguarded for the future. And this influences bottom up. We have had some cases in South Asia where very small village groups clubbed together because they had similar concerns in the landscape to reduce the flood risks, in fact. And they were able then to influence the disaster risk management plans, at the district level and eventually the national level, and that influenced the World Bank financing to their delta. So it's incredibly powerful if you can get that bottom-up process working.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Alexander, your FAO, going first mostly at top level and policy, and now you're going into community and all that. So what's your response to this?
No, obviously I support very much the whole approach of going bottom up. I mean, having spent a large part of my career as an NGO for various organizations where participatory rural appraisal was the basis of working life everywhere. At the same time, we do have to deal with the macro dimension, and it is one of the fundamental roles of FAO to act as a neutral facilitator and convener. FAO is where people come together to argue, debate, disagree, and hopefully in the end agree around major policy decisions. Having said that, bringing those policy decisions together is often the most difficult point, and reconciling them at different levels, because it's not a bimodal system. It's not a local and a national. There are often 5 or 6 different levels in between, and often many, many different line ministries, and often reconciling the different interests in a national spectrum are very difficult. And I can give you a concrete example. We were asked in India to facilitate a dialogue on the issue of crop residue burning, rice straw burning specifically, which, as you probably all know, is a huge problem. I mean, Delhi has become, it's had huge health issues because of the crop residue burning, and this all has to do with the introduction of new cereal varieties so that there's very little time between harvesting one crop and the next to dispose of the stubble. So they burn it, they torch it, which in one field is not too bad, but when you multiply it, as in everything on India on massive scale, it becomes a huge problem. It's not that there isn't a solution. There are far too many solutions. One line ministry wants to burn it for biofuel. Another line ministry wants to compact it into fiberboard to make IKEA furniture. Another line ministry wants to mulch it back into the soil. There are as many solutions as there are. And of course, we talk about federal, local, district, and they all have their own priorities. And within even the federal government, there are 3 or 4 different line ministries who all have their own priorities. And each taken individually, every solution has pros and cons, and there's some very, very good pros to them. So how do we reconcile those with what the farmers want, which is essentially to clear their fields quickly, get rid of the stubble so they can plant their second crop or their third crop, and if possible, make a bit of money on the side on the stubble. They're not very demanding. They just want to move ahead with what they have to do. And so our role in that case is to, first of all, bring the best possible science to the table, analyze a lot of these procedures and say, okay, well, making this into fiberboard for furniture is probably not the optimal solution because it's very low value, but we need the economics in that. Transporting large volumes of stubble is also not a great solution. Mulching it is difficult. You probably don't know, rice stubble has a lot of silica. It destroys the blades of mulchers. So there are no easy solutions, but the job is to find out what is the best solution to prevent it from being burned. That's a policy negotiation, but it has to be something which fits first and foremost with the needs of the farmers on the ground. It's their solution.
Thank you. Anyone else on that?
I don't have a lot to add, but all I wanted to emphasize is that local communities know a great deal about how to work with their ecosystems. You know, often the most rich knowledge about how to manage it, how to restore, you know, comes from them. And so their knowledge, that knowledge has to inform. So it's not so much it's about bottom up or top down. It's like, where is the best knowledge about how to work with ecosystems in a rapidly changing world coming from? And it might be coming from science, but in many contexts, you know, a lot of it, you know, there isn't time for the science to figure all these things out, and we have to somehow build platforms, build opportunities, you know, open up communication channels so that we can kind of access and co-create these bodies of knowledge, and that can then inform target setting, whether that, you know, that ultimately comes via a top-down process or a bottom-up process. It's all sort of about knowledge, about how to work in those ecosystems. So I suppose respecting that's really important, and trying to sort of really think about knowledge exchange. And certainly when it comes to like how we adapt in general, I mean, so much of the knowledge is in the global south, isn't it? And we in the global north have a lot to learn, and so it's just enabling that. And so I think all those agencies that do that are involved in enabling that transfer of knowledge are doing a really, really important thing, or at least it's a big part of the story.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you know, communities have been adapting for centuries. The issue is now that climate change is perhaps outpacing their ability and resources. They have a huge wealth of knowledge. So climate science and they all need to go together, yeah.
Yeah, that just sparks something in my mind. I mean, some communities are just in really variable areas that have always been very variable, and other communities are in areas that have been stable for thousands of years. But there's a lot of geographical variation in who knows what about how to deal with climate change. So I think that's really important to sort of make that connection is really important as well. So the knowledge is sort of very scattered, and we need to bring it all together. Sorry.
Thank you. Mikko, on this, and then also there was a very specific question about funds reaching to the communities.
Thank you, Olli. I'll start with the specific question from Ms. Mugambe, and then return a little bit to this more general discussion on different levels. So when the Adaptation Fund was set up 12 years ago, there was frustration, I could say, among developing countries especially, that first of all, there was not enough adaptation finance, and we know that's still the case, there's still not enough adaptation finance. But the little finance that was available at that point, a big part of that was lost at the macro level in policy formulation, in capacity development, and so on. And the countries felt that there was very little trickling down to the actual community level. So the Adaptation Fund was set up against that backdrop, and in its mandate, it has that its mandate is to finance concrete adaptation interventions on the ground. Concrete here means something visible and tangible. So it can be infrastructure, but it can also be a change in land use, for instance, as long as it's somehow made in a permanent, in a sustainable way that doesn't evaporate when the project ends. So that is how the framework of the fund tries to support the channeling of funds to the local level. In addition to that, the Adaptation Fund, as I briefly mentioned, is the first climate fund that put something called direct access into practice, which means that countries can have their own national agencies accredited to manage these funds. They develop proposals, they implement the projects, they do take care of all the responsibilities. We have 31 countries around the world, 31 developing countries that have made it, that have had their entities accredited, and the Green Climate Fund has followed this model as well of also making direct access possible. And it seems that direct access at least can cut down the administrative cost that is needed for channeling the fund, so that there is larger portion of those funds available for the actual activities on the ground. Some of our national implementing entities have been pushing the envelope even further and started implementing something called enhanced direct access. And the first example of this is our national implementing entity in South Africa, the South African National Biodiversity Institute, that put in place a system whereby communities really apply for funding, and all of the decision-making process of how the funds are allocated between different projects takes place at that national level. We at the international level, we just get reports and see what they've decided. And it's a process or a mechanism that has a great promise, because it would really enable taking the decision-making role to the grassroots level. It has turned out to be quite challenging, and the main challenge is that many of these local organizations have capacity challenges. They need to be trained and their capacity built, and it takes time, and it actually at this point takes a bit more funds than in the traditional model to do that. But of course, to make things sustainable, we hope that through these experiences and through the built capacity, we could come up with more sustainable use of funds and rely less on the international level. On the importance of local level action and the fact that like it was mentioned, the best knowledge is with the local organizations. That's true. We've seen that indigenous knowledge and other local knowledge is very important in how the projects are designed. But in addition to that, it's important to understand that when we implement adaptation actions, there are a lot of drivers that are at play that are not climate related and that are very specific to the community or the society where these projects take place. So for example, we have projects that seek to improve the protective function of coastal forests. And if we do that, we need to be quite keenly aware of the drivers of deforestation in those communities and find the ways to engage the local communities, for instance, through community level pacts of not cutting the forest in exchange of receiving funding. And we've done that in some projects, and it's an example again that underpins the importance of understanding the local reality and working with the communities that actually know best how things should be done. Thank you.
Alexander, one question was specific to your low emission, livestock management.
Yes, definitely, from our friend from Uganda. A very difficult question, of course, and one which there's a lot of debate about. Obviously, livestock emissions are a big problem. 11% of all greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than the steel industry entirely. So livestock is something we have to take very seriously. And within the livestock sector, we know that ruminants, especially cows, sheep, and goats, are the primary source. Poultry and swine are much, much smaller. So there is a big debate, and we need to do something about it. The question is how much. There are disparities in meat consumption which range from about 5 kilos or 7 kilos per person per year in sub-Saharan Africa to my country here, where we consume about 120 kilos per person per day. That suggests that we probably need to look at those disparities. There are parts of the world where they probably need to get more protein content, and maybe here in the States we need a bit less. So that would go a long way. Having said that, in the livestock sector, with the technology that's available now, and by technology I don't mean fancy machines, I mean processes, methods, knowledge, and so on, we can already reduce livestock emissions by about 30%, just by better feeding practices, better pasture practices, and especially better animal waste management. So there's a huge amount, and this is largely not being done for the moment. There are a few areas where we've managed to make some progress. There's a coalition working in the dairy sector. We recently signed a partnership with Arla, the Danish consortium. The dairy sector is very receptive to this. The meat sector is in complete denial, I would say, right now. They're basically hoping it will go away as a problem, which it will not. And it's not about reducing, individual animal emissions. It's about maximizing the breeding, the feeding, and the waste management of those animals. And these are all traditional practices, and of course in sub-Saharan Africa, where there is relatively abundant labor accompanying pastoralism, this is easiest. Where it's harder is in open range, low intensity systems, such as pampa grass and so on. So there are solutions. We need to think about what they are, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can go after right away.
Thank you. Jane, one question about water management in communities and the frustration our colleague shared.
I think the question was about how we could join forces and what shape that might take. And well, I don't know, but I'd love to talk to you about it. So it sounds to me like maybe we could pick on a particular part of the world or key landscape and home in on how we could combine our different approaches and how we could make the water stewardship methodology more accessible, perhaps, to a wider range of stakeholders. How we can, in particular, I think, connect the ecosystem part better in to the water metrics. That would be very helpful. But, well, let's have a chat or a beer or something and think about what we might do practically.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. You know, policy, practice, on-ground resourcing, these are all the challenges we have to come and, you know, I think we are all trying to learn very fast. But again, challenges are there. The good thing is that we are cognizant of these. And that's the thing, you know, we need to keep asking, keep promoting these things. Things can be improved. Overall, it's moving, but again, pace is slow, but a lot of happening in climate change, and we need to be dynamic. As I said earlier, climate change is a moving target. So our response should also be dynamic enough to keep the pace with it. Thank you very much, all the panelists. And we will come back to questions in the second panel also, but let's give them a big hand. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, we'll come to now our second phase, where we will be having very action-oriented some pitches from our next speakers, so that we could look into how action-oriented work is being done or being committed. So I'll request now Yiching Song, Chip Cunliffe, Andrew Norton, Henk Nieboer, Matthijs Bout, Nicky Batang. Could you please all come over here, and then we'll share some of your experiences and the work being done. Yes, okay, yeah. Okay, so thank you for being here. We will have very quick round, around 1 minute, you know, as they say. Attention span of all of us is around for 40 seconds. So we are trying to measure that, okay, how, you know, all these things, the pitch is made, and please have your questions, and then we will come to multimedia also. But we'll go first initially with our 3 panelists here. So I'll start with Yiching, Academy of Sciences. You've been working on National Farmer Seed Network. So could you share your sum of work?
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to share. Okay, hereby I would like to share one of our programs that collaborates with IIED and other institutes. It's a big climate change programs led by Chinese Academy of Science. We just working on a very small section on that. I want to share 2 points here. One is that we start with this sub-project with working together with scientists on integrated conceptual and research framework first, trying to combine the scientific framework with more livelihood and community-based. Combine these two type of framework together and make it more integrated. And this first step. And second step, we're trying to use this integrated conceptual framework in 3 vulnerable, climate change vulnerable regions. One is systems, one is dryland, another one is mountain area, another one is the coast. 3 kind of ecosystems. And there we're trying to select 1 or 2 community in each ecosystems, and then try there to use this framework and link the scientific adaptation knowledge and the technologies with the traditional knowledge, and to make this kind of demonstration communities. This is two big steps we are using there. And the last one, we're trying to that, as just mentioned, we are leading a national-wide network we call the Pharmacy Network, which is linking about the 3 ecosystems covering about 10 provinces in China. There, through this kind of platform, we're trying to link the ecosystem-based adaptation champions and the farmer communities and smallholder farmers and their actions and what they have done, and the link to the policy makings. One concrete example is that we have made a poster there, is women farmer empowerment. This project is in one of the dryland areas in Qinghai province. There we link with the Chinese government's poverty alleviation programs and collaborate with the provincial government in linking to their poverty alleviation project. So there we really have empowered women farmers. So go into the more detail, you can look into the poster. Thank you.
Thank you. Chip, Cunliffe, about the Sustainable Development Director, so Ocean Risk Initiative, about that or about your work, if in 1 minute you could share, then we'll come back again.
I'll be quick. Well, AXA, and indeed the part of AXA that I work for, AXA XL, has been focusing on ocean change for the last about 20 odd years, 25 years actually. And we know that the oceans are changing, fastest rate in 65 billion years or so. So we're seeing, increased intensity of storms, sea level rise, storm surges, human impacts through, well, all the things we're seeing on television at the moment. But of course, what we need to do is we need to develop solutions to that. And so over the last year or so, we've been leading with our partners, Ocean Unite and the Global Resilience Partnership, and others, the development of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. And that's ultimately a multi-sectoral approach to finding finance solutions to these risks in small and developing states and the LDCs through investment into natural capital. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail once we've got through this part of the section.
Thank you for keeping time. Wonderful. Nicky, you've been working with indigenous knowledge and all this from the Philippines, working a lot with the indigenous people. Would you share some of your experiences?
Actually, it's not about sharing what we are doing, because as indigenous peoples, we've been doing these nature-based solutions since time immemorial. So what we are as part of the IP major group or the IP caucus here in the international level is to bring what is our commitment to the international community as well as our international community or to the whole world. So actually this NBS, as we coined as technical or community, scientific communities, is being implemented by indigenous people since time immemorial through their traditional knowledge associated with their customary governance systems and their practices that have been passed through generations, right? And the traditional or the indigenous knowledge systems on resource management of these indigenous peoples okay, have been demonstrated the enhancement of the quality of these ecosystems, including the biodiversity within, and as well as their sustainable livelihood practices have entailed economic security and empowerment. So these contributions of indigenous peoples have been recognized internationally, including the CBD and the UNFCCC. So I, as representing the Tebtebba Foundation, and together with our partner communities in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, are committed to continuously support each other's initiatives and activities in relation to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. We have this what we call enhancing indigenous peoples' capacities in climate change adaptation and mitigation program, where we are not only aiming to lessen down the concentration of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, but at the same time, we want to scale up or enhance our resiliency to climate change impacts and climate change and its impacts. So we will continue to, in this program, we will continue to practice our indigenous knowledge system and resource management, our sustainable way of livelihood, and also adopt innovation which is appropriate with our culture. So that's innovation including this renewable energy, because we are also aiming to have renewable energy sources in our community as part of our adaptation.
Okay.
But we just want to, one of the underlying consideration is that for the state and other significant actor dealing with us, we want you, or we ask you to respect our right as indigenous peoples, including our rights to land, territory, and resources, as well as our free, prior, and informed consent. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicky. Let's have some reactions and observation and the work being done by you all, or some questions. And again, keep putting your question on Mentimeter. We will try to come back to those, but we will definitely keep them, and other observations we will take as the outcome of this session. So please do use Mentimeter. Any other from observation or question or any?
Could we give 3 minutes just for people to write, because it might take a little time for the
Okay, yeah, but
software.
we have one reaction, yes? Andrea, yes, please. Okay, yeah, you may just do that.
Thank you, Ali. Andrea Erickson with the Nature Conservancy, and I just wanted to add a word to the Global Resilience Partnership and AGWA, who published with us a sector analysis of nature-based solutions in the water sector. And so I have a copy here, and there were some up on the table before, but what I think is interesting, notable about this is it's not just about trying to identify what nature-based solutions look like in the water sector, but I'm really pleased in the number of examples that are here. And I'll mention we're in New York City, where it's one of our largest water supply systems that are unfiltered because of the investment New York City made in the Catskills to invest in their watershed and nature-based solutions. We've used that as a model in 34 countries around the world, cities around the world, to do water funds. And there's many other examples of on the ground, but also policy change that really gets at scale. And I want to highlight the work in Peru, where they've taken nature-based solutions to a national regulatory environment. So a call is to learn more about real positive experiences, and there are many here that might be displayed in this. Nature.org is the website. You can find the report there. And a question to the group is, with so many real-life experiences that were beyond the pilot stage, it's beyond the economics, it's beyond other things. What is the way by which we get past individual cases and really move into social uptake beyond our individual organizations? I feel like there's lots of great things to learn from everybody here, and I'm looking for the next step forward.
Thank you. So one question is also this, that how to move from individual cases and pilots to a social uptake. So policy uptake we have heard in the previous, so that's a good point, policy uptake. And please also you may vote the questions because, if there are more questions, we can, go back to the top one only. Okay, any other reaction or question? Yes, please.
My name is Leonida Odongo from Fahamu Africa, which is also a member of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. My question is about reconciling nature-based solutions to the current extractive industry. We are seeing what is happening, like for instance, in my country, there's discovery of oil and gas, and this has negative impacts on the environment and also contributing to climate change because of the extractive process. Maybe the panelists can tell us, how do you reconcile this phenomena with nature-based solutions? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so capturing some questions also, extractive. Okay.
Just a reminder to ask questions on Menti, so you can do so anonymously, or for people online, just go to www.menti.com and use the code at the top, and then you can ask your question and upvote. We'll leave it open while the rest of the pitches are going as well, so you're welcome to add questions during that.
Okay, before we make all the rest of the three pitches, let's discuss a little bit about these, two observations we have. Reflect, how to take this social uptake from the pilots and individuals. And second is extractive industry, safeguards, NBS. Anyone has background on this and would like to share? Yes, please. I believe you.
Yeah, I could reflect a little bit on I'm Henk Nieboer of the Ecoshape Foundation. This extractive industries question, look, the basic nature of extractive industries is that it is not nature-based, so they take out resources and for use elsewhere. The only thing that you could hope or might hope is that the infrastructure needed to support it is designed as much as possible by nature-based solutions, and it could be by develop, if you need a port to ship your oil, that you don't build it in a traditional way with hard structures, etc., but use the opportunity to enhance existing ecosystems. But the activity in itself is extractive industries by definition. It's hardly. I see difficulty imagining in it doing that by nature-based solutions.
Thank you. Anyone? Yes, please.
Hello. I just want to come back on the question about pilots, and I think that's probably right, or the observation is correct in terrestrial environments. I think that the number of examples that we see of nature-based solutions in the coastal environment are very few. So we have a coral reef insurance product that's not quite moved forward in Mexico. In fact, TNC is working on that. We have a blue carbon resilience credit that we're working on together, AXA and the Nature Conservancy. We have a blue bond in the Baltic, and we have a, what was the last one, golly? And a debt swap with the Seychelles, again, TNC involved. Those are four. I can't actually get to the thumb on my hand of an example, or of examples that sort of give us even further ability to be able to go on that, beyond that pilot stage. So I think that it depends upon where you're looking. So I think in the coastal space, we are at the very beginning, exactly why this alliance is being set up, to drive that pipeline of projects and indeed products that we can utilize to scale and accelerate that resilience within those coastal communities around the world.
Thank you. We'll come back to this discussion again. And also other panelists who are here, please feel free to pitch in if you have any answer, because it's all knowledge sharing, we don't know everything. So that's the, best thing about it, when we are sitting together, let's learn from each other. Matthijs, about design, agriculture, that's a new area to the conservation, traditional conservation. Would you share some of work and the pitch you want to make, please?
Yeah, I come to this discussion as a designer from like a bit of a circuitous route. We've been working on climate adaptation and mitigation projects for about 7 years now, since we won the project to do the coastal protection of Lower Manhattan, and we've done that work globally. And there's a couple of things that I've come to understand in the meantime. One of them is that we've been far too optimistic about the ease of implementation, and we've been far too optimistic about the cost of implementation and of these adaptation measures. And we've also been far too optimistic about the pace and impact of the climate crisis. And so that, and what I see happening even in high capacity, high resource, high value places, is there's still a sort of risk of doubling down on what has been done wrong in the 20th century. And that's why, for me, nature-based solutions are so important, because we really need to add those to our menu of tools. We need the feedback mechanisms that we've learning from this implementation back into our strategic planning, and for that, nature-based solutions are a really critical point. One, to maximize benefits, to be cost-effective, and to be inclusive. And there, I think that for me, a challenge is to sort of say, well, if that is the case, we need to really introduce systemic thinking about nature-based solutions in urban situations, across urban systems, so at a larger scale than we are doing now. We need to find ways to align our programs, our capital programs, with nature-based solutions in a very integrated way. And that's why I'm really happy that one of the projects I get to work on is we're leading a team in the Water as Leverage program with Wetlands International and TNC as part of our team. And there, what we are really trying to do is use design as a way to show how programmatic and capital alignment can work, linked to the different initiatives that DFIs, for instance, would be supporting, tweaking the existing projects such that they start including nature-based solutions, and using design and the ability to visualize things, to have inclusive conversations with the financial sectors, with infrastructure planners, with the local communities on these type of topics. And we are finding out that that's really powerful, because it allows us to as I think is the title of this panel, to really to have a conversation about nature-based solutions at scale and in the urban systems.
Thank you. Urban system.
Question?
Yes, you
Is
may.
that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
But
we'll come back to answer later on.
Yeah, but so very quickly, I mean, I just interested to know whether, I mean, education is hugely important in this, and not just for those people who are already in the position of power, if we can call it that, or positions of responsibility, but in terms of educating those individuals who are at school, university, etc. Is all of this, is nature-based solutions already, and in terms of the planning, is that already being integrated into the way in which they learn?
I think in general, there's two ways of answering that question, and if I can answer it now, one of them is I think that the design school needs to change in order to be able to do this work and to think much more about how design can have this agency, and not like designers used to have to want to control the world in a way and shape the world. But the second thing is that design offers, by its ability to show how things work, the ability to engage large audiences. And with that, we find that in these projects we work with high schoolers or with universities or with lots of different sort of different educational environments to make them part of the solution.
Thank you. Our next speaker also, about building with nature. Henk, would you share some of your thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you, Ali, for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity. Ecoshape is a foundation carrying out the knowledge program Building with Nature. We are building the evidence base for nature-based solutions along coast, rivers, and in deltas. We do that by creating physical pilots. So we have created 14 physical nature-based solutions, are measuring and monitoring what they do. And our flagship program at the moment is securing eroding coastlines in Indonesia through the creation of a mangrove-based economy. We do that project together with Wetlands and the government of Indonesia. And well, I'm really excited that today I can announce that we are going to scale up and replicate this in the wider region of Asia. In July, we have organized a high-level event in Rotterdam, which was hosted by the Global Commission on Adaptation. And already Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and China have shown interest to work together on this topic. And we have created a shared ambition document called Accelerating Adaptation Through Building with Nature in Asia, I must say. Well, as a next step, the Global Commission on Adaptation will be working together with Indonesia to create a regional platform of public and private intersectoral parties to create momentum for this idea of creating mangrove-based economies as a way to adapt to climate change. The next step in this process will be a conference which will be organized by the Global Center and Indonesia in Indonesia. And also we will be working to make this an integral part of the nature-based solutions action track of the Global Commission on Adaptation.
Thank you. Let's, Andrew, your share thoughts and then we'll come back on these aspects. Andrew Norton from IIED.
Thank you very much indeed. Just offer some quick thoughts. IIED works on a broad range of topics. I think one of the remarkable things about nature-based solutions, which is really highlighted by the sort of urgency in the public debate, is the kind of stunning range of co-benefits that they can deliver, not just resilience, adaptation, mitigation, but also in relation to the crisis of biodiversity loss, but also they can be a vehicle to strengthen social justice and rights as well, if done well. But that's a big if. Yeah. So I think that's something we'd want to take forward. We have a lot of work on land rights and strengthening land rights at the local level. So we'll be looking to for ways of innovating and strengthening those links. In terms of the main areas that we will be taking forward, we'll continue to learn lessons to develop and test scalable solutions. Recent work that Yiching, who's here, has led on that in 13 different areas, working with partners, is one example of that, but that'll be a major kind of thrust for us. There's also a range of work that we can talk about creating the political economy conditions for effective local action on nature-based solutions, including this theme of making sure that resources reach communities, the sort of what we call the money where it matters kind of element of delivery of climate finance in particular. We have currently a program with the least developed countries group, Life AR, focusing very much on that, but other work as well. Sharing and learning lessons is key. Every year at the COP, we do something called Development and Climate Days with partners, and this year there will be a day on nature-based solutions. So this is also a general invitation to people to participate in that and bring their experiences. Special partnerships as well. I think NAT, the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, we're looking forward to working with that, but also the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences and the work that was mentioned by my co-panelist earlier. So a range of key partnerships around that. A final word just on innovation, because I think it's possible to bring, it will be possible as this goes forward, to bring lots of elements of public policy to bear on this. We've done some work on labour guarantee schemes, which can be used to mobilise labour for local ecosystem stewardship as well. So that's also There are lots of ways that social policy also can be brought to bear on this. And I think that's all I'll say for now. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Andrew. You encompass your thoughts, all aspects of nature-based solutions. We have some questions from on Mentimeter. Would you share some? Yeah, please.
So the top voted question on Mentimeter is how to design an NBS approach in case certain risks are not yet known or not quantifiable.
Would you read the rest also, please?
I'll read the top three, maybe. How can we leverage behavioral change science to increase action on NBS and adaptation in general? Is the second question. And another one that was highly voted, or had 2 votes. What can we all do tomorrow to ensure that Indigenous peoples' voices on this, on NBS, are heard? And maybe I can continue.
Yeah. Okay, let's look, and maybe one of you or a couple of you can, about risk assessment. So anyone would like to respond on that? You know, we don't know all the risk in nature-based solutions, so how best to respond? Do you agree with that, or any thoughts? Yes, please. Henk?
Yeah, last year in the Netherlands we had a symposium on 10 years of Deltares, which is a local knowledge institute. And the director, the scientific director of Deltares said, with nature-based solutions, with the science of nature-based solutions, we are now at where we were in the 19th century with grey infrastructure. Well, I don't completely agree with him, but there are still a lot of unknowns, and we have to deal with that. So there are intrinsic unknowns, so we don't fully see through the long-term behavior of many nature-based solutions. But we need to adapt our management practices to that. So instead of minimizing on asset management, we should allow for more interactive and adaptive management, so that if something unforeseen happens, we can act. And about the risks, there are always, you have the known unknowns. So that are risks for which you may prepare through your management system, but the unknown unknowns are very difficult to include. But that's part of life, I guess, for everything we do.
Yeah, so as you said, the key is adaptive, management. Like we run our home, we know we do calculation of risk and we respond. So maybe the day we start taking this planet also as home, maybe together we can do a better response. Yeah, Henk and Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just a quick thought that as this gathers pace, there can be also social risks attached to the value embedded, in, whether it's in terms of carbon or increasingly recognized value for local ecosystem services or biodiversity. There's a risk, particularly if that's monetized, that could have effects that are not good at a social level. So one of the things we'll need to manage is that sense of how to make sure that communities retain rights in the face of growing value at that level. So we need a principle. The nature-based solutions have to work for social justice as well as for climate solutions.
Right. Matthijs, you wanted to say? Yeah.
I'd like to comment on the second question, but I think you had an addition.
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of the insurance industry, we require data to basically understand risk and therefore transfer it. But in the nature, in this area around the coasts, certainly with relating to mangroves and the degradation of mangroves and coral reefs, etc., there's very little information that we can utilize to better understand how we price risk on land. So whether it be for assets, whether it be for power stations or houses or populations themselves. And so one of the things that we're looking to try and do is to develop an ocean risk index, which would look at sea level rise and the physical risk of sea level rise and storm surge, allied to the impact of degradation to marine ecosystems. And that is very new, because if you take away your coral reef or you take away your mangrove, evidently the asset on land is likely to be, or at least the risk to your asset on land is going to increase. So we need that data, and we need to be working together to collate that and really drive all that forward, because otherwise we can't identify these solutions to move this space forward.
Thank you. Very important point. Yeah, because what's happening, perhaps, we have state-of-the-art data, but that's not linked with everything. Maybe mangroves. I know TNC, IOS in Cambridge University, they did recently restoration potential of mangroves. But at the same time, corals are there, and studies are showing that if multiple ecosystems, they support each other, corals support mangrove, the shore protection and all this, so that data is critical. So thank you for pointing it out. Okay, because of time, behavioral change, multi-million-dollar question. Many a time, we have the, science, data, all this, but behavioral change doesn't occur. So that's, yes, Matthijs?
A lot of work at Penn with the Wharton School on, let's say, behavioral science and decision-making processes in relation to risk. And one of the things that you learn there is that many of the biases are most prominent in relation to catastrophic risk. That's the most difficult thing to think about or to conceive. And so one of the things that we have then thought about a lot is that by focusing on stresses rather than shocks, and by focusing on benefits and sort of economic connections, cultural connections, social connections, you can actually reduce the biases, because it's closer, the biases are much less. So it's really, and that's I think one of the strengths of nature-based solutions, because you address, there are so many benefits to them. If you address those more immediate benefits, you can better navigate or manage the behavior, and you have to worry less about the behavioral biases.
No, thank you. Behavior and visible risk, that's the major problem. Many studies, psychologists who are working on climate change and behavior, that it's invisible risk. Though people are, but like death, we think if somebody else will die, we won't die. But so that's the problem with climate change also. Sometimes all these projections and likelihood of happening, people can't relate to them unless it becomes a disaster and hits us. So that's the problem with this, and maybe, as you said, maybe we can break it down and then look into what can be done. But again, it will remain a challenge. Like, air pollution kills maybe in cities 20,000 people per year, but the response is not there. But if there is a terrorist act of, something, 2 people dying, there will be millions of dollars will be invested in that, but people still dying in major cities. And statistics, go from 20 to 50,000, and now as you were saying in Delhi and other, it's a major issue, but still investment in that, because it's not that catastrophic, because it's slow-paced, and that's the problem. Okay, indigenous, how can we, respect indigenous knowledge? And a lot of, talk is going on, but still indigenous people are suffering. Many a time, in the name of privatization, development, we all see what's happening in Brazil with all the, things are changing. Is there a way? Maybe we could start with you, Ricky.
Yeah, it's for us, it's very important, just like those kind of problems, it's very important to collaborate or have connection with other indigenous peoples group or other people who have worked with you, so that it will help you, okay, to counter this kind of problem. So I think for me personally, it's very important to have a collaborative work partnership with other groups.
Thank you. Anyone else on? Yes, please. Ying?
Okay, I think this is very important for nature-based solution to working with indigenous people and to let indigenous people to avoid to be heard. As our previous panelists have mentioned about nature-based solution need to work at all levels simultaneously, but bottom-up should be very important and the cross-sectors approach. And for this, based on our team's experience working with local communities and indigenous women groups, and we think that it's important to empowering them first. To empower them, we can, not necessarily that we need teach them and training them. Farmer to farmer, community to farmer, community exchange are very important. We just have my colleague here, just have a coordinator, one network in, indigenous network in Yunnan, linking with indigenous network with Guizhou, 2 provinces. They automatically link with each other and have some activity together, which are very important. This is the first one. The second one, that indigenous people, they have a traditional knowledge, but they are looking for scientific support. They need more scientific knowledge to working together with scientists. So linking scientists' knowledge with traditional knowledge are important. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from our other audience? Maybe we have few minutes, we can go to any other question on, yes?
Yeah, there's quite a few more questions, so we could take time for one more, maybe, or 2. So another question from Mentimeter is, given that only 2% of climate finance is going to nature-based solutions, how can we fund and scale up nature-based solutions?
Yeah, scaling up, financing, all these. Yes, please.
I switched it off. I think it's working. Now, I think that we should not only focus on climate funds if we want to make nature-based solutions more mainstream. And in fact, I see as one of my personal challenges to also integrate the concept of nature-based solutions in all the money flows in the world that are already there. I mean, the climate fund is one thing, but think of all the enormous amounts of money that is being spent on infrastructure worldwide by governments from their own funds. If we can integrate nature-inclusive design, nature-based solutions there, we will also gain a lot.
Okay. Yes, please. Chip.
Thank you. So I echo Henk and what you've just said, but I'd also I go back to a point actually that I made before, which is about value. And if you want to drive money or you want to drive capital into this space, then you need to create value for that ecosystem. And so one of the projects, as I said, was the development of a blue carbon and resilience credit. So you're creating a value for a carbon value for mangroves, and you're also creating a resilience value for it as well. Now, evidently, there's quite a lot of private or there's quite a lot of impact investment finance out there and in fact, there are quite a lot of impact investors who are looking to put their money into this space, but don't know where to put it. And what we need to try and do is to identify those different projects that they can put that money into. Indeed, AXA this year announced a €200 million fund into biodiversity and nature-based solutions. So the money is out there. We just need to provide a value for those ecosystems.
Thank you, Chief, for pointing it out. Again, many a time we say, and perhaps elephant in the room is return on conservation, return on NBS. We have lots of studies on, value of ecosystems, but that's the value of the ecosystem services they provide. But what you invest and we invest and the donors invest, we also need to have more evidence that it is coming out like the initiative with IIED, IUC, and WCMC, effectiveness of EBA, told us that from 13 sites there is, but effectiveness is there and different criteria were met. But still, a lot needs to be done. Let's not hide behind those studies which are more economic studies of those ecosystems, which say, oh, there's millions of dollars of this wetland is providing, for nature. My question to all that is that if you go to developing countries in Africa, you go to, all Asia, other Cambodia, some of the richest ecosystem which have been valued as, $20 million, poorest of the poor are living over there. So that's a fact of life. On one hand, we use those arguments that we need to respect nature, but at the same time, pristine ecosystems, poorest of the poor are living over there. So governance, equitable sharing, benefit sharing, and all that, that's critical. If you look at ecosystems, mangroves, many, we mentioned, okay, those are the nursery grounds for 80 different commercial fish. Fish are mobile. They go. Communities who perhaps managing those with our projects and programs, they live on, maybe $3 or $2 a day. And because fish is mobile, all their protection, the benefits are reaped by big trawlers. Do we need to do environmental fiscal reforms? Do we need to look into governance aspects where the big trawlers are taxed and the money can go to that? It needs to go beyond payment for ecosystem services. So there are still challenges, and the key is let's be open about them, let's question our approaches, and let's learn from each other. There's a wealth of knowledge, but the issue is sometimes we are so project-oriented. So project-oriented approach will take us to pilots, as you said. To change them into programs, we need to show evidence, and then public survey, investment and private sector. That will take further steps. Otherwise, we might have anecdotal study, all the examples, big, good case studies, but going beyond that, we will keep struggling. So first thing is that we as a conservation sector also need to do ruthless some analyses and then work together to build upon each other's strength and then bring in public sector and private sector. Thank you for the panelists. And we will go now to the last session. In that, we will request all the panelists also and all of you. Could you put that, what aspect you want to be taken up by the climate summit? So can you share your responses on Mentimeter? What any question you want to put to the climate summit or any action based on all the discussions we had in 1.5 hours. So if you can, maybe just put your thoughts on Mentimeter. What action you would like from this session, the Climate Action Summit, you would like to see to bring change or bring commitment. So any idea, any thoughts you would like to share. We will try to put all of these and the gist of it as an outcome of this session will feed into the day thinking and the messages which will go to the climate summit. So take few minutes, think through what action you would like this climate summit, I'm repeating myself, and then will be taken forward. It could be just your one sentence or some keyword, as I see partnerships coming, indigenous knowledge, return on investment, or or anything you would like us to take it forward with the organizers of the climate summit. So let's take few minutes and then you can put on Mentimeter or any way, please do share. Okay, thank you. So we had around 26 responses, I believe. So it's really good. Partnerships, indigenous knowledge, biodiversity, and all these linking adaptation, mitigation, understanding the term, risk, all of this. So we will take the gist of it, transform it as per the key messages, action-oriented, which can be taken forward from this session to the climate summit. Partnerships are the key, I believe, having worked almost 25 years in this development sector and also conservation sector, we have all our expertise, speciality. Climate change, as I keep saying, is a moving target. My resilience or your resilience is not just one unilateral. It's not just healthy ecosystems. It's healthy ecosystems, biodiversity, because that underpins development. But at the same time, health, education, roads, shelter, economic growth, income, all these, access, rights, responsive, gender integrated, indigenous knowledge, and respect to nature and economic and social, all this is needed. And that's why many of us are fortunate enough that we can cope with the challenges we are facing. If there is dirty water, we buy the water. If there is flooding, we may move upstream or in those areas which are not that flood prone, because we are economically developed and many times we have a say. But billions of people are out there who are not fortunate enough. So one key which I learned is that we cannot, respond to climate change just with a unilateral response. We need to have integrated approach. We need to break the silos. Otherwise, we will keep struggling and keep discussing. So let's try to break the silos. It's easier said than done, but that's the only way. Thank you very much for your time.